most advanced military in human history spent $2 trillion on invisible jets, hypersonic missiles, and satellites that can read a license plate from orbit. And the one thing soldiers beg for when they're surrounded and out of ammo at 2 in the morning is a 1960s cargo plane. Not a stealth bomber, not a drone, not anything with a classified designation and a congressional budget fight behind it. A cargo plane. Slow. Loud. So big you can see it on radar from 100 miles out. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. It works. The AC-130J Ghostrider cost $165 million per aircraft. It flies at roughly Mach 4.4. That's the aeronautical equivalent of a moving truck on a highway, while everything else is doing 200. Its wingspan is wider than a 3-story building is tall. It glows on infrared like a campfire. By every metric that modern air power doctrine says matters, speed, stealth, survivability, this machine is a flying target. The Pentagon knows this. The generals know this. The pilots who fly it know this better than anyone. And for 60 years, when everything else failed, when the situation on the ground went from bad to unsurvivable, this is the aircraft they called. Not because the Air Force ran out of better options, because there is no better option for what this thing does. So what does it do? That's the question. And the answer is not what you'd expect from a $165 million weapons system. It's not a technology answer. It's not a stealth answer. It stays. Fighter jets are sprinters. They get there fast, spend what they have, and they're gone in minutes because the fuel says so. A jet can save you once, maybe twice if you're lucky with the timing. The Ghostrider shows up and does not leave. It has a combat radius of over 3,000 miles. It carries a crew of 8. 8 actual human beings crammed into a vibrating steel tube. And the only hard limit on how long it can hold station above your position is how long those 8 people can physically keep going. That's the weapon. Not the guns, not the missiles, not the $40 million sensor suite. There are infantry soldiers alive today, specific people, with names, with kids, because an AC-130 circled above them for 4 hours straight in the dark and kept killing everything that moved toward their position until the sun came up. Not heroically, not cinematically, just stubbornly. And right now, in 2026, the United States Air Force is in the middle of a decision that would permanently end what this aircraft has been for 6 decades. They're going to pull the heart out of it. And by the time this video is over, you'll understand exactly why, and exactly what gets lost when they do. Now let's talk about what this machine is actually made of, because the outside tells you almost nothing. From the ground, the Ghostrider looks like a cargo hauler with some hardware bolted on. What it actually is a flying fire control center, one of the most sophisticated surveillance and weapons integration platforms ever built, wrapped inside an airframe that looks like it belongs at a regional airport. Up front, a multi-mode radar that sees through weather, through smoke, through darkness. A high-definition infrared sensor, the kind where crews half joke you can read a license plate from 20,000 feet on a clear night. A laser designator, a mission management console that lets the crew coordinate fires, talk to ground troops, and manage multiple weapon systems at once, simultaneously, in real time. And from that platform at altitude, completely invisible to anyone below, it kills with weapons they may never hear coming. GBU-39 small diameter bombs, GBU-69 glide munitions, AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, Griffin missiles. These weapons travel in silence from high altitude and arrive without warning. A man is gone before the sound of the engines even reaches him. There's a word for what that does to the people who survive it. It's not just fear of being killed. It's the knowledge that death can come from anywhere, at any time, with no signal, no warning, no way to know it's coming. That specific quality of helplessness does something to fighting, will that direct fire simply cannot replicate. But here's what separates the Ghostrider from every other platform in the inventory. After it fires, it stays. Now, the 105. Because if the precision weapons are the brain of this machine, the 105mm Howitzer bolted to its left side is the part that defies rational explanation, and it's the first thing every soldier who has ever been saved by this airplane will mention. This is a full M102 field howitzer, the same caliber of cannon that an army artillery unit drags behind a truck and emplaces on the ground. Somebody, at some point in the 1960s, decided to cut a hole in the side of a cargo aircraft, bolt this cannon into that hole, and fire it sideways out of a moving airplane. That idea is insane. It is also genius. Every time the 105 fires, a recoil force of approximately 10,900 pounds hits the airframe, not spread over time, 10,900 pounds of instantaneous shock hitting the same point on the fuselage repeatedly while the airplane is in flight. The entire 164,000-pound aircraft shudders. Not subtly, the crew in the back feels it in their teeth. And the shell, 50 pounds each one. The special mission aviators in the rear are physically loading a 50-pound artillery round into the breech every 6 to 10 seconds, by hand, in a dark, vibrating, tilted airplane banked hard to the left, in a compartment thick with burned powder and hydraulic fluid. 6 to 10 rounds per minute, for hours. The 105 is not precise the way a guided bomb is precise. It is the weapon that destroys cover. It is the weapon that ends the psychology of the enemy's position. When a 105 shell detonates 30 meters from a fighting position, it doesn't just kill. It shakes the ground. It collapses the space. It breaks the mental architecture of anyone still standing within earshot. In Afghanistan, there are documented accounts of enemy fighters abandoning positions, not because of casualties, but because of the sound. Because the 105 sounds like the world ending from somewhere directly above them in the dark, somewhere they cannot locate, cannot target, and cannot stop. Paired with the 30mm GAU-23 Setier autocannon on the same aircraft, handling everything the 105 is too blunt for, the Ghostrider delivers two completely different categories of violence. One precise, one overwhelming. The crew switches between them in seconds depending on what the ground is asking for. That combination, the scalpel and the sledgehammer, controlled by the same set of hands from the same aircraft for hours without stopping, is what makes the Ghostrider irreplaceable to the people it protects. Or at least, it was. Now I need to tell you about the day that almost ended all of this, because it explains something important about what this aircraft really is underneath all the hardware. April 21st, 2015. The 413th Flight Test Squadron takes a brand new AC-130J, tail number 095710, factory fresh, never in combat, out over the Gulf of Mexico for a handling evaluation. About 40 miles south of Eglin Air Force Base, altitude 15,000 feet. The pilot initiates a side-slip test, standard airworthiness evaluation. You apply rudder input and observe how the aircraft responds. Cargo pilots run variations of this routinely. There is nothing dramatic about it. Something goes wrong. The rudder input is too aggressive. The aircraft loses coordinated flight. It rolls past 90 degrees and keeps going, past 180 degrees, essentially inverting. Upside down. No cargo aircraft is certified for inverted flight. The structural design does not account for it. The airframe begins experiencing G-loads it was never engineered to see. The crew fights it. They lose 5,000 feet of altitude in the recovery. 5,000 feet, about a mile, of freefall while they're trying to bring a 74-ton airplane back from a position it was never supposed to be in. Nobody dies. They get it back to the runway. But when the engineers examine the airframe, it's over. The G-loads have permanently deformed the structural members. The metal remembers. The aircraft cannot be certified to fly again. A $115 million airplane, gone, not to a missile, not to combat, to one rudder input on a clear day over a calm gulf. They stripped it and turned it into a static ground trainer. What this event exposed is something every aviation engineer already understood, but nobody in the acquisition chain wanted to dwell on too long. The AC-130J is a high-performance weapons system built on a cargo hauler's skeleton. You can add radar arrays. You can add precision munitions and a $40 million fire control computer. You can cover it in the most sophisticated sensors the defense industry produces. But the structure underneath is still a C-130 transport from a design lineage that dates to the early 1950s. It performs, it endures, but it has a ceiling, and when you exceed that ceiling by 1 degree in the wrong moment, physics does not care what the program cost. The men in the cockpit carry that knowledge on every sortie. There is a hard line on what they can ask of this machine. Cross it once by a fraction, in the wrong configuration, and the airframe doesn't warn you, it just breaks. For 20 years, none of that mattered much, because the environment never pushed it that far. From the Gulf War through the official end of combat operations in Afghanistan, the AC-130's record was extraordinary. Not a single gunship lost to enemy fire since 1991. Night after night, over Iraq, over Afghanistan, over Somalia, over Syria, they flew and they came home. That record built something inside AFSOC, the Air Force Special Operations Command. It built confidence, and confidence, given enough time and enough success, slides into something more dangerous. It built the assumption that this would always be true. Here is the thing about that 20-year run that rarely gets said clearly. Every single one of those missions was flown in what the military calls a permissive environment. The enemy had AK-47s, Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns, 14.5mm, effective ceiling maybe 5,000 feet, rocket-propelled grenades. Against those weapons at altitude, the AC-130 was untouchable, not because it was fast, not because it was stealthy, but because the threat simply could not reach it. The ceiling on the enemy's capability was lower than the floor of the Ghostrider's operating altitude. The 20-year kill record is not a testament to the AC-130's survivability against a modern military. It is a testament to the fact that the Taliban did not have a surface-to-air missile network, and that world, operationally, is finished. This is where the story stops being about a gun and starts being about a question the Pentagon has not been able to answer cleanly. Great power competition. That is the phrase the defense establishment now uses for the strategic environment the US military has been forced to reckon with. Not counterterrorism, not irregular warfare, peer adversaries, nation-states with layered integrated air defense networks, what strategists call A2AD environments, anti-access, area denial. Put the Ghostrider into that picture and stay with it for a moment. You have a fixed-wing aircraft with a 132-foot wingspan, generating significant heat from 4 large turboprop engines, moving at Mach 0.4 with 0 stealth characteristics. Modern active electronically scanned array radars can detect and track this aircraft at distances far beyond the Ghostrider's effective weapons range. Long-range surface-to-air missile systems, the kind that peer adversaries field in serious numbers, have engagement envelopes that the AC-130 cannot survive, cannot outmaneuver, and cannot outrun. John Venable, a former F-16 pilot and senior defense analyst, has stated the assessment plainly. In a contested environment, one where an adversary has capable integrated air defenses and fighter aircraft, the AC-130J becomes combat ineffective. Not degraded, not reduced in capability. Ineffective. The moment it enters airspace defended by a modern air defense system, it is not a gunship, it's a target. This is the paradox the Ghostrider cannot engineer its way out of. Its entire value, the thing that makes it irreplaceable to the soldiers who have called on it for 60 years, requires the aircraft to be directly above the fight. The pylon turn, the lateral fire, the 105mm howitzer blasting through the side of the fuselage, all of it demands sustained, low-speed exposure directly over the engagement area. Modern air defense makes that a death sentence against a serious opponent. A senior AFSOC official was reportedly asked in a congressional briefing what the Ghostrider's role would be if it could no longer freely loiter over friendly troops in a contested environment. The reported answer was not a confident operational plan. So what do you do with a machine whose entire reason for existing is now its primary vulnerability? The answer the Air Force has arrived at is the most uncomfortable decision in the Ghostrider's 60-year history. Starting in the 2026 timeframe, the service is moving to remove the 105mm howitzer from the AC-130J fleet, permanently. And I want you to understand what that decision actually means in practical terms, because it is not as straightforward as pulling a bolt. The 105 is not simply a weapon on a mount. It is a structural element of the aircraft. The cannon assembly, with its mount, recoil mechanism, and associated systems, weighs approximately 1,465 pounds. It sits on the left fuselage specifically to serve as a counterbalance against the weight distribution of the sensor packages and other systems. Remove it, and you do not simply have a lighter airplane. You have an airplane with a structural and aerodynamic imbalance that has to be completely re-engineered. That means modifying the airframe on every jet in the fleet, fabricating new structural components where the cannon mount used to live, closing the aperture in the fuselage, recertifying each aircraft. On a fleet of roughly 30 active AC-130Js, you are talking about tens of millions of dollars per airframe, just to correct for the absence of the thing you removed. It is, in the most literal sense, the most expensive way imaginable to make a gunship into something that is no longer a gunship. What goes in its place is a standoff capability, a ASA radar in the nose for long-range targeting, the rear cargo ramp configured as a launch platform for small cruise missiles, a system in the class of what has been described publicly as a black arrow, along with continued use of small-diameter bombs as the primary precision munition. The operational concept is survivability through distance. Instead of flying directly over the fight for 3 hours, the aircraft stays outside the threat envelope, 60, 80, potentially 100 miles back, launches weapons, and never commits to the sustained exposure that has defined the platform since Vietnam, which is a rational engineering response to a real threat environment, right up until you account for what disappears. The 105mm Howitzer produces something no missile system replicates, not just lethality. The psychological weight of an artillery cannon firing from directly overhead in the middle of the night, for hours without stopping, from a source the enemy cannot locate and cannot neutralize. A missile launched from 80 miles away and a 50-pound shell fired from 5,000 feet directly above you are functionally similar in their ability to kill one person. They are not remotely similar in their ability to break an enemy's will to keep fighting. One arrives without context. The other arrives with a message. The message is, I am directly above you. I have been here for 3 hours. I will be here when the sun comes up, and there is nothing you can do about it. That message, carried by the sound of 4 turboprops grinding slow circles in the dark overhead, has ended more firefights than any single piece of ordnance in the AC-130's history. Not through lethality alone, through the specific psychological weight of a presence that will not leave. You cannot replicate that with a cruise missile fired from a safe distance. You can approximate the kill. You cannot approximate the staying. 60 years ago, this platform was improvised out of necessity. The first AC-130 was a cargo plane somebody decided to arm because the conventional alternatives were not working in the jungles of Southeast Asia. It was a desperate answer to an urgent and ugly problem, and it worked. It worked in Vietnam. It worked in Grenada, Panama, and the Gulf. It worked in Mogadishu. It worked in every major special operations action of the last 3 decades. The Army consistently rates it as their most requested close air support platform. There are soldiers alive today, specific people, not statistics, because an AC-130 held station above them through the night and kept killing until the threat was gone. That is not a small thing. That is the entire reason this aircraft exists. But the world that made it irreplaceable was a world with a specific kind of enemy. An enemy dangerous enough to need this aircraft, but not equipped enough to shoot it down. And that world, as an operational reality, is over. The great difficulty of the Ghostrider's current situation is that its excellence is what makes adaptation so painful. It is a perfect instrument for the fights of the last 20 years. It is dangerously exposed in the fights of the next 20. And the institutional memory, the visceral, hard-won knowledge that this machine saves lives in ways nothing else can, makes the rational adjustment feel like a betrayal. The engineers and strategists at AFSOC are not wrong about the threat environment. The AC-130J cannot survive in contested airspace against a peer adversary. That is not opinion. It is aerodynamics and missile physics. But the infantry soldier who looks up at 3 in the morning and hears those 4 turboprops grinding overhead does not need a briefing on integrated air defense systems. He needs to know that something is up there, that it is staying, that whatever happens in the next hour, there is a machine above him that will not leave. No standoff missile system communicates that. There is going to come a moment, and the timeline is now measured in months, not years, when the last AC-130J carrying a 105mm howitzer completes its final combat sortie. The crew will land. The cannon will be removed for the last time. A modification kit will be logged, the airframe updated, and the aircraft will continue to fly under the same name with a fundamentally different identity. The Ghostrider, as it has existed since 1967, will be gone. The aircraft will persist. The name will persist. It will carry sensors and cruise missiles, and it will remain expensive, and it will remain capable in the ways that matter against the threat environments the Pentagon is planning for. But the thing that made it the Ghost, the willingness to hang over the fight in the dark, low and slow and grinding, for as long as 8 human bodies could hold out, that will have been conceded to the physics of the modern battlefield. The strategists will write their assessments. The test pilots will refine the new concept of operations. The program will proceed on schedule, or it won't. The machinery of defense acquisition will continue its slow, expensive turning. And the men who used to load 50-pound shells by hand in the dark, leaning hard into a continuous left bank, eyes burning from cordite smoke, the whole airframe shaking underneath them, those men will know something that will never make it into an official document. What they were doing was not sustainable against a modern threat environment. It was also something that will not be replaced. The era of the machine that stayed, the one that showed up at the worst moment and refused to leave until the job was done, is ending. What replaces it may be smarter, safer, more survivable against the adversaries that actually keep the Joint Chiefs awake at night. But it won't be there. And on a dark night, in a muddy ditch, surrounded and running low on everything, the difference between a missile launched from 80 miles away and 4 turboprops grinding slow circles directly overhead is not a tactical distinction. It's the difference between knowing help is coming and knowing it's already there. That difference is everything.